Hello friends, welcome to CEC Live Lectures. Dear friends, today in this session, we are going to continue further in our series on Indian philosophy. Today also we are going to talk on Introduction to Nyaya Philosophy. We have already conducted 2 sessions on Nyaya Philosophy, and today also we are going to get in-depth knowledge on the topic. And for the discussion on the topic, we have with us in our studios Dr. Ajay Verma. Dr. Ajay Verma is Associate Professor in Center for Philosophy, School of Social Sciences, JNU. Let's welcome our guest, Dr. Ajay Verma, and let's try to understand more about Nyaya Philosophy. Hello, sir. Welcome to the lecture.
Thank you, Gitika. So friends, as many of you may already be aware, we have been talking about Nyaya Philosophy in this particular series of lectures, and as you may already know that we have been discussing about different categories that Nyaya proposes. And under that, and we've already covered some ground in what is the ultimate aim that Nyaya Philosophy puts before itself. So now to sort of recapitulate, some of the things that we have discussed in some of the previous lectures, and trying to connect it with our sort of further discussion. Let's do a quick recapitulation of what Nyaya Philosophy is about. So, as many of you would remember, basically Nyaya Philosophy is aimed towards knowing knowing our world, knowing the things around us in their true nature. What does it mean when we say to know things as they actually are in their true nature? What it means is that anything that we find to be lying somewhere, which could be an object of knowledge, that it's caused by something. It has parts. It is also at the same time a new entity. It has a particular kind of relationship with its qualities. It has properties. It has qualities called dharmas, and it is also a locus of those qualities. This is why an object from this aspect, from this point of view, is also called dharming. And there is some kind of an internal schematic unity that we can find within a given object. So the object has certain parts. These parts are related to the whole, and the whole is related to the parts as a part of a particular kind of structure. And there's some kind of a relationship that different parts have with each other, have with the whole. And also at the same time, the thing in question, the object of knowledge, also bears some kind of relationship with the things around itself. So basically, when we say that Nyaya Philosophy is aimed at understanding the nature of the object as it actually is, what we mean by this is that here, Nyaya philosophers are attempting to know the object along with its properties, along with its qualities, that is dharmas, and also apart from these, the aim is also to know what kind of relationships, meaning sambandha, an object has with its own parts, and how, what kind of relationships that object may have with other objects. So basically, the aim is to know the dharman, meaning the object, as the locus of a certain set of properties, and also to know the dharmas, that is the set of properties that are associated with the object that is to be known or is known, and different relationships that provide a particular kind of a structure to the world. So these are the three main things that one aims to understand when it comes to Nyaya philosophy. But then one might wonder that as we already know that most the schools of Indian philosophy, probably leaving out Charvakas, are also are also soteriological. What it means is that there's this famous saying in Indian philosophy, "Sa vidya ya vimuktai," which means that knowledge is that which liberates. So knowledge is something that is not only something that has value in itself, but knowledge is also viewed as instrumental towards leading us to liberation. So knowledge, the worth of knowledge, our worth of self-cognition is evaluated in terms of how far it goes towards liberating us. So much so that for Buddhists, anything that doesn't concern or that doesn't serve any soteriological purpose, that doesn't concern the human situation, need not be known at all. So this is why we this is why, as is famously said, Buddha used to refuse to reply to some of the questions which were purely metaphysical in nature, and the answers to which could not be given with sufficient degree of certainty. And even more importantly, that those questions which do not relate to our ultimate purpose in life, which is seeking liberation. So from this point of view, one might wonder that in case of Nyaya philosophy, it may seem to us that if the attempt is only to know the nature of the object as they actually are, along with their properties and along with the kind of relationships they bear with each other, and the kind of relationship that an object bears with its own parts, and overall schematic unity that that exists within the object and that we generally find in the world. So if the main objective of Nyaya philosophy is only to understand this, then it might seem to us that they are probably not concerned with the other very essential important part of most of the schools of Indian philosophy, namely liberation. But as a matter of fact, it might be interesting for us to know that for Naiyayikas as well, knowledge for Naiyayikas as well, there is somebody. So there is a goal that we want to achieve. There is they have a definite conception of liberation towards which their inquiry is supposed to be aimed at, and therefore they are also a fit case for that famous saying that we earlier spoke about, "Sa vidya ya vimuktai." So for them, how does this kind of inquiry relate to liberation? According to them, when our life is mainly concerned with how we live, and when we live, when we are sort of living our life is mainly about actions, and we perform actions when we have a definite conception of an object. So when we know an object, we know it as so and so. And that being the case, when we form a certain kind of a conception of a particular object, we act accordingly towards it. So say, for example, if I know an object as to be so and so, say for example as chair, I'll act towards that object in a particular way. If I know the same object as something else, say for example a table, a bottle, a glass of water, and so on and so forth, my practice, my action, my behavior towards that object would change. So therefore, to act correctly, it is very important for us to know the object correctly. Therefore, action and knowledge have this very important kind of a relationship with each other. So their overall project is that if we know their overall proposal, soteriological proposal, goes something like this: that if we know the object along with its true nature, then we also know what to do with that object. We'll be sort of prompted to perform certain action which is appropriate, and if our actions are appropriate, they would not result in frustration. And it would also lead to a right kind of discrimination in us regarding how the things are different from each other, what is the actual nature of things, and so on and so forth. And once we know that, which also includes the knowledge of the nature of self, and once we have the knowledge of everything around us, we have the knowledge of the world as it actually is, as in its actual nature, and a knowledge of the self as it actually is, it ultimately leads to liberation that they call apavarga. But here, another point that we should bear in mind is that language is also a very, very important epistemic tool, in the sense that language is, as would attest to common observation, we require language at two levels. One, we require language to have any kind of understanding at all of the world. If we don't have a language, if we don't have any conceptual scheme inside us, in our minds, then there wouldn't be any understanding of things coming forth. As a matter of fact, we don't even form memories if we don't have language. So children, it's been attested by, it's been proven true even by some of the scientific experiments that children when they start learning a particular kind of language is also around the time when they start forming any kind of memories about things at all. So language is not only very, very important from the point of view of having any understanding about the world, having any knowledge of anything at all, but also it is very important for communication. In our daily lives, in our daily practice, vyavahar as it's called in Nyaya Philosophy, we not only know objects through language, but we communicate with each other, we articulate what we know through language. So from the point of view of language, there are two aims that Nyaya philosophy wants to achieve. One is to categorize the objects that we know correctly, which would lead to our right cognition of the world. Right cognition is tantamount to knowing, is tantamount to knowledge. So first aim is to know the object in its true nature, and second objective is to be able to articulate, is to be able to communicate about it in the right way, which also includes having a position on a particular philosophical issue. Say, for example, I could have a particular position on the nature of the world as such, or the nature of a particular object. Say, for example, the nature of self. And once I form a particular kind of idea about a particular kind of thesis about a particular object, then the second part would be to be able to articulate this philosophical position that I hold well, which would also include to be able to communicate it well to others, to be able to argue well when you are putting your position, your philosophical position before the opponent. This also includes while if there is a disagreement, which is very likely because of plurality of views about any philosophical issues. So in such cases, I should be able to articulate my position well. So this brings our discussion to the second part, which is that a language is not only used to understand the object, not only is this an epistemic tool, which is covered by the Pramana Shastra, but it is also an important tool to articulate our views, to be able to argue in favor of our position, and so on. And this is why, for Nyaya philosophy, it's very important to be able to analyze the different types of arguments that are proposed by the opponent, or that are put forth by us. It's very important from the point of view of philosophy to be able to examine them threadbare and to be able to find flaws if there are any, and so on. So logic, reasoning and rationality are some of the keywords, some of the core philosophical issues that Nyaya philosophers are dealing with. From that point of view, and there are several of padarthas that are proposed in Nyaya Sutras. We have talked about many of them, including Vad, Jalpa and Vitanda, to sort of have a quick recap of some of them. You would remember that we had talked about Jalpa and Vitanda, where in Jalpa one tries to give misleading arguments in order to be able to establish one's position, but in Vitanda even that intention is given up. So in Vitanda type of argument, one argues merely to refute the position of other without having any position to establish of one's own. So this is a kind of a category of disputation, where the main focus is the intention of the disputant, the intention of the person who's putting forth an argument. So in Vitanda type of argument, you don't have any position to prove. You just want to refute the position of the other. And in Vad, as you would remember, Vad is a type of inquiry where your main focus is to arrive at truth, where you're ready to revise your position. So your main aim is to arrive at truth by proposing your own arguments, and if the arguments of the other are better argued, then you are also ready to accept the argument of the other. Now, moving forward from there, there are certain fallacious type of reasonings that talks about, and they call it Hetvabhasas, or which also could be viewed as specious reasoning. So Hetvabhasa means an argument that defies the rules of rationality. It is reasoning that seems to be valid but on a closer examination found to be unfounded. Therefore, Hetvabhasa is a fallacy of inference. Gautam defines Hetvabhasa as a fallacious probance, because they do not possess all the characteristic of true probance, but they seem sufficiently similar to a probance. Here, Hetvabhas does not mean a defective hetu, but rather a seeming or pseudo hetu. The Sanskrit term Hetvabhasa, however, may be taken to mean not only the semblance of a hetu, that is dushta hetu, but also a faulty hetu. So basically the idea here is that hetvabhas, the term hetvabhas is a compound of two different words, hetu and abhas. So if we look into the etymological meaning of it, what it means is that whenever we are drawing inference, most of the arguments are sort of are dependent upon certain kind of reasoning, some kind of universal premise is required, as we are already aware. Two particular premises cannot lead to any conclusion. Say, for example, if we say this is a table, this is a chair, premises of this kind do not lead to any particular kind of conclusions. Whereas even if there is one universal premise, say for example, all tables are pieces of furniture. This is a table, therefore this table is also a piece of furniture. This is a valid kind of inference that is drawn, because it has it's based on a particular based on a universal premise. It's based on true premises, one of which is universal in nature. But at times, the kind of mediating link, say for example in the fire and smoke example, our smoke is our link to the object of knowledge, which is fire. So this mediation, and the sign, as it is called, the mediating sign is called hetu. And at times, our knowledge of the hetu may not be correct. To give an example, hetu may be just in appearance may seem to be right, but as in its actual nature, it may not be correct. Say, for example, when we talk about smoke and fire example, somebody may be standing, say for example, on a hill and might find some smoke like view that could be seen on the opposite hill. Now in order to ascertain that there is, and then we also must understand here that these inferences were very important, because in old times, there used to be these mendicants, there used to be these saints who would be constantly on move. They would be moving from one place to another, and as the night would fall, they would require a place to spend their night, and they would preferably spend it somewhere where in a village where there are some more people. So this used to be an important sign. Say for example, if you can see fire, if you can see smoke rising from a hill, it is a sign that somebody probably stays there, and you may want to reach there before the night falls, so that you are able to spend your night in safety. So, but we also know that say for example, what might appear to us across the hill, on the opposite hill, may not be actually smoke. Maybe it is a small piece of cloud. It could be just fog, engulfing that particular part of the mountain, and so on and so forth. So it is very important to first of all ascertain that this is an instance of smoke and not fog or anything else. So it is very important, therefore. So it's very important how we establish this relationship between the hetu and the sadhya. whether the universal premise that we are forming, say for example, where there is smoke there is fire, when we form such premises, is there sufficient observation behind it? Furthermore, in the present particular case, have we sufficiently ascertained that hetu is there before us, that it's not a fallacious kind of reasoning that we may involve ourselves into, which would lead to incorrect inference, and so on and so forth. So it shouldn't be we need to ascertain that a particular piece of reasoning, a particular hetu mediating link is not merely an appearance of hetu but a real one, and also that it's it's dosha free, it's not faulty. So this is why Hetvabhas forms one very important category for Nyaya philosophers, and it's generally studied under the head of inference, which is a separate pramana in Nyaya philosophy. Now, moving on from Hetvabhas to another category proposed in Nyaya philosophy, which is Chal. Now, in Chal is again a kind of disputation where one of the parties to a dispute, after failing to give a good argument against his opponent, advances irrelevant or pseudo replies. Here an attempt is made to contradict the argument of another person by giving an unfair reply. The respondent contradicts a statement by taking it in a sense other than the one the speaker intended. It could be likened to amphiboly or equivocation. So here, the attempt is made to deliberately misunderstand the position of the opponent, and by deliberately misunderstanding the position of the other, you start arguing against that position. So since if you form a particular understanding of the opponent's position, which is easier to refute, you would rather want to misunderstand it. So if misunderstanding, if presenting a misunderstood and deliberately misunderstood position of the opponent, then it becomes, and you deliberately misunderstand it in such a way that you are able to refute it. So this kind of disputation, involving oneself in an argument, following this by making such attempts, is called chala. And the classic example is, say for example, if your opponent uses the phrase Navakambala, it could be the term Nav could refer to the number 9. It could also refer to it could also mean new. So if the opponent means it in the sense of new, you may deliberately want to misunderstand it as 9. And you may say, well, why do you require 9 blankets instead of, you being the only person here, why would you want 9 blankets instead of 1? So such kind of attempts, when you try to, in such a way, when you try to deliberately misunderstand the opponent's position, this is what you call chala. And as we are already aware, this kind of argument, this kind of fallacy in Western logic is referred to as amphiboly or equivocation. So friends, we will continue our discussion on different types of fallacious arguments. We'll return after a short break. Thank you.
With this note, thank you, sir. Thank you so very much for giving us this session on Nyaya Philosophy. Friends, there is a lot more for you. You are requested to be with us as we are back after a short break. Thank you. Hello friends, welcome back to this session. Friends, as you know that today we are talking on Nyaya Philosophy and we are trying to understand in detail what Nyaya Philosophy is. Friends, for the discussion on the topic, we have with us in our studios Dr. Ajay Verma. Dr. Ajay Verma is Associate Professor in Center for Philosophy, School of Social Sciences, JNU. We would like to quote that Dr. Verma is a dynamic professor and through him we always get in-depth knowledge on various topics of philosophy. So let's take advantages from his experiences and let's try to understand more about Nyaya Philosophy. Hello sir, welcome back to the session.
Thank you, Geetika. Welcome back, viewers. So we were talking about chala, which is another form of disputation, which is another form of argument, where the opponent deliberately misunderstands the position of the opponent in such a way that it becomes easier for him or her to refute. And here, the attempt is basically, and also we must understand here that it is different from, say, for example, there is something called tatparya, the intention of the speaker. So at times we may genuinely fail to understand the intention of the speaker, but that's not the case here. Say, for example, regarding tatparya, the classical example that is offered is that of Saindhava. So, if there is somebody who's ready to go, say for example, from one village to another, and waiting for and sitting on a horse for that purpose, or ready to go somewhere, then if that person asks for Sandhava, then it should be clear to the listener that this person is more likely to be asking for a horse instead of salt, which is another meaning. So the term Sandhava here could, in Sanskrit it means, it could mean horse, and it could also mean salt. But the intention of the speaker could be ascertained by looking at the context. But at times, if we are not sensitive enough towards the context, if we misunderstand, if we don't have a proper knowledge of the context, then we might fail to ascertain the intention of the speaker appropriately. But here, that's not the case. It's not that you misunderstood the intention. Here, the attempt is to deliberately misunderstand and understand the opponent's position in such a way that it is easier to refute. Now, another type of argument that is Nyayikas talk about under different categories that they propose in Nyaya Sutra is jati. Now, jati stands for all those futile arguments advanced by one party against the other, which instead of destroying the opponent's position, really contradict the position of the one who advances those arguments. It consists in advancing a futile argument based on similarity or dissimilarity between things. For example, in trying to meet the argument, that is, in trying to present the arguments, an argument against the position that sound being in effect is non-eternal like a jar. So what does this argument involve here? The opponent is proposing that sound is an effect of somebody wanting to speak, or it is caused by something, and anything that is caused is non-eternal. For example, jar. And as we already know that in inference, it's necessary to offer an example. So the different 5 parts are pratigya, hetu, udharan, upnaya, and nigman. So udharan is a very important part of Nyaya's view of inference. So if this is the argument that is being proposed by somebody, the opponent may argue that the sound is eternal like sky, sound shares with sky the property of being incorporeal. The point here is that merely similarity or dissimilarity cannot be a conclusive point in disproving an argument. What needs to be attacked instead is the general assumption that is being made in the argument and the proof offered for that assumption in the argument. So, if somebody gives this argument that sound is non-eternal because it is produced, because it has been caused. So all things that are produced are non-eternal. For example, jar. Therefore, since sound is also something that is caused, therefore it has to be non-eternal as well. Now the opponent in return may say that sound, just like sky, which is incorporeal, is eternal. Similarly, sound is also incorporeal. It does not have any material reality, so to speak. So it's incorporeal, and just like sky, because of its property of incorporeality, is eternal. Similarly, we should believe that sound is also eternal. Now, the point here is that the relationship between first of all, one could today we know that it's not the case that sound is incorporeal. It is something that is very much measurable. We sort of have now devices through which we could measure the sound, its pitch, and different aspects of it. So therefore, its incorporeality could be put into question. But more importantly than that, here the point is that there is no necessary connection that has been established between the incorporeality and eternality of anything, including sound. So, just on the basis of some kind of a superficial similarity that something might hold with something else is not good enough, to complete an analogy between things. So, this analogy between sound and sky is not correct. So if somebody says that they are analogous, as a matter of fact, when we on a closer examination, we find that this similarity is misplaced. So such kind of arguments where we propose a particular kind of a position on a particular issue on the basis of a very superficial similarity or dissimilarity with something. Such kind of fallacious arguments are called jati. Now the next in line and the final category that Nyayikas talk about is called nigrahasthana. Nigrahasthana is the last entity in Gautama's list of padarthas, or Gautama's list of categories. Nigraha, if we look at the etymological meaning of nigrahasthana, nigraha means defeat and the sthan means place, so that it leads to the final defeat of the opponent or of the proponent or the opponent. It includes many different kinds of arguments leading to the final defeat of one of the parties. Gautam, in the second chapter of the fifth part of the Nyaya Sutra, lists 22 of such arguments which lead to a final defeat. So we do not go into all those 22 kind of arguments that Nyaya Sutra believes, because we are just trying to sort of look at Nyaya philosophy in its broad contours. So basically nigrahasthana is the type of is a kind of argument which kind of clinches, which proves to be a kind of a clincher and brings the discussion, brings the arguments and counter arguments, this entire process to an end. So basically, the point here is that when you offer arguments, and if your position is strong, and if your position is well argued, if you have proper proofs for your position, then there would be a time when you're arguing with the opponent, with somebody who has a position contrary to yours, or contradicting your position. Then as you offer arguments one after the other, or even if you offer just one argument, if that argument is of such a nature that the opponent does not have an answer to that, then from the point of view of what this argument achieves, it is referred to as nigrahasthana. So nigrahasthana, one could say in a certain sense, it's the kind of argument which brings the opponent to the final defeat, where the opponent is proved completely is proven wrong once and for all. So such kind of argument which clinches, which acts as a clincher in the process of argumentation, counter argumentation, is called nigrahasthana. And these are all the different padarthas that Nyaya philosophers talk about. And we must understand that among these different pramanas, as we know that he begins by talking about by talking about the epistemic instruments, the entire praman vyavastha, the sources of knowledge, the nature of knowledge, and so on and so forth. But when we are assuming a particular position, it's not only important to know the nature as it actually is, but the attempt should also be made to make the other understand how it's not to be misunderstood. What could be the different ways of misunderstanding? So Nayayikas, in this way, and if we look at the kind of the range of categories, different padarthas that they are talking about, if we look at their list of padarthas, we find that their concern is not only regarding how an object should be known, what should count as the right source of knowledge, what should be, what is the nature of knowledge or true cognition, how we ascertain it, what should be, how we should define it, and so on and so forth. But there is also an attempt, to make one understand how not to know an object, because knowing an object in those particular ways would inevitably result in misunderstanding of the nature of object as such. So the attempt is also to, the attempt is not only to know the object in its true aspect, but the attempt is also negatively also pointing out what are the possible ways of misunderstanding, and therefore the avoidable ways of misunderstanding the object. And since based on our definition of knowledge and the sources of knowledge, we could have different positions. Therefore it is incumbent upon a particular philosopher to be able to argue well for one's position, and while engaging in argument with other, it's very important to understand what counts as a good argument, what counts as an unsound argument. It is important to be able to find flaws if there are any in the argument of the opponent. So all these things are taken into consideration by Nyayikas, and as you would remember that basically this particular system of thought initially began, they sort of, it was initially an oral tradition, and these philosophers were called Tarkikas, and their sole aim was was to develop important principles of the art of argumentation, the art of disputation, and that was about it. They didn't have a metaphysics of their own. They didn't propose any soteriological program of their own. But it is only after Gautam who systematizes it in a particular way in his Nyaya Sutras, which is the foundational text of this particular thought system, but also proposes a particular kind of soteriological program, which is called Apavarga. So for Nyayikas, the ultimate aim to achieve is apavarga, or liberation. So after Gautam, this is not only the sort of an oral tradition. It's not only a tradition based on the art of argumentation, where people belonging to different schools of thought could come and learn the art of argumentation and disputation. Instead of that, it finally developed and grew as a separate full-fledged thought system within Indian philosophy named Nyaya. And as we would remember, they borrow most of their metaphysical tenets from Vaisheshikas, and we'll talk about Vaisheshikas in a separate lecture. Now, from the Padarthas, the basic aim of enumerating the Padarthas should be now clear to us. So, these list of Padarthas, or the list of entities, it must be clear that these are entities in a highly abstract sense, shows what really occurs between the parties of a dispute, beginning with doubt and ending with ascertainment of truth, defeat of one of the parties and the victory of the other. Such an argumentative tradition since ancient times was a part of the rational discourse of the Indian philosophers, and the task of the Nyaya commentators was to give them precise definitions and formulations. It must also be evident that the concept of reason implicit in these discussions makes reason inseparable from proper, precise and goal-oriented use of language, and from intersubjective discourse. This is, as put forth by Jonathan Kanedi, and a very well-known scholar of Indian philosophy. So, basically the idea here was behind sort of giving this list of padarthas is how we are sort of our quest for knowledge begins with some kind of a doubt in mind, and how sort of therefore we need to ascertain, to have firm, proper judgments about the nature of things. We require to ascertain the truth. And even when there are different philosophers would engage in arguments with each other, the proper idea should be to engage with each other in an argument in order to ascertain the truth. So, in a certain way, there is nothing like being defeated or defeating the other, because ultimately the point is to be able to arrive at truth. So it should be the truth that wins at the end of a proper argument, a properly argued argument. And also, I mean, if we want to relate it to, sort of what could be the political value of it, it's not only important from the point of view of liberation, but also, as various political philosophers point out lately, among them Habermas, it becomes very important that even when we are in a public space, when we are making we are talking with each other there, when we are having discussions with each other, say for example on what should count as the best form of government and so on and so forth. So there, as Habermas points out, we should make sure that then ideal speech situation, something that he refers to as ideal speech situation, is maintained. So even when we are entering into a dialogue with each other in a public space, it is very important that that particular space, that public space where we are having arguments against each other, where we are rather having discussions with each other about the best form of political setup or any other social issues, the space should be free from coercions, because we may try to give arguments where we offer arguments from the point of view of having a particular end in mind, and we would be giving our arguments not in order to know the truth, but to derive the opponent to some kind of a preconceived, premeditated end that we have in our mind, which would lead to different kind of coercions, and that wouldn't be a sign of true democratic setup. So, from the point of view of reasoning and rationality, it is not only important from the point of view of metaphysics. It's not only important from the point of view of just knowing the world as in its true nature, which would lead us to liberation, but from other points of view also it has its political value as well. Now, having understood that, we are now in a position to shift our attention to as we earlier discussed, that Nyaya philosophy also has a soteriological proposal. They have a particular view of what according to them should count as liberation, and concomitant to that, they have a particular idea of self. So we can now shift our attention to what according to Nyaya philosopher, what according to Nyayikas is the true nature of the self, or the Atma. So now the nature of the self for Nyaya Vaisheshika school, Atman, or self, includes both the finite individual selves or souls, as well as the infinite soul, that is God. And the self, furthermore, is too subtle and cannot be perceived by any of the senses. Such judgments as I am happy, I am sad, do not provide any knowledge of the true nature of the self. Knowledge of the self is inferred from pleasure, pain, desire, hatred, effort, and consciousness. So first of all, we must understand that according to Nyaya philosophers, there are any number of souls or selves which are eternal, but which are eternal, but at the same time, they come into this world along with some kind of embodiment, depending upon our past karmas. And since any activity requires an agent, so similarly making selves or atmas, embodied beings, requires an agent, and that agent is God. But just like any agent, has a soul too, God is, in that sense, the biggest of them, the biggest in the sense like the most important of them. So, selves, their idea of self also includes includes God, which is which is some kind of infinite self. And also at the same time, self is too subtle, and it is of such nature that one cannot have a direct perception of it. It's not, so to speak, available to us as one of the entities in the world. We cannot have any direct, so to speak, confrontation with it. So self is of such kind that it is not, for the knower, available as one of the objects out there, available, in one's sort of field of senses. So it's too subtle for to be known through direct means, namely through our senses. Therefore, it can only be inferred. Through what are actually its properties. So, as we are already aware, that in the case of inference, we only have the perception of the properties that are very known to be associated with something else, which may be out there behind the field of our perception. So similarly, since self is not directly available to us within our field of senses, but its properties are available to us for observation. So say, for example, the different kind of feelings are the properties that are associated with the self: knowledge, awareness, consciousness, and different kind of feelings, conations. Pain, desire, hatred, effort, and consciousness. All these are viewed as certain properties of the self, and these properties are available to us for a direct view. So, and here it's also important to point out that for Nyayikas, feelings like pain, pleasure, and desire, hatred, effort, the kind of mental responses we might have towards a particular object, these are all not modifications of consciousness, as probably a Vijnanvad in Buddhist would hold, or so these are not modifications of consciousness. Instead, these are some of the objects of perception. These are not modes of perception, but these are objects of perception. So, and since we perceive pleasure, pain, we know them, therefore through them we can infer that since we are able to know our pain, our pleasure, and so on and so forth, therefore there must be a self that is associated with it. So in this sense, in this way, self is something that we could indirectly know. Not available for it's just not something that is immediate. So this view of self is quite in distinction from any idealist position, including Buddhist Vijnanvad, or for that matter Advaita's position, where self is immediate, where self is, as a matter of fact, is so immediate that any kind of mediation is only an appearance of which is later on sublated. So friends, after having discussed all the nature, all the different padarthas as proposed by Nyaya Philosophy, and having a brief discussion on nature of self, we'll have to stop here because of the paucity of time. We'll continue our discussion on the nature of self and liberation in our next lecture. Thank you.
With this note, thank you, sir. Thank you so very much for giving us this session on Nyaya Philosophy. Friends, if you wish to write to us regarding today's lecture, then do write to us at info.cec@nic.in. We are going to meet again soon. Till then, take care. Goodbye. Thank you, sir. Thank you once again.